Welcome to all. My name is Daniel Canstrom. I'm the Faculty Director of the Rappaport Center for Law and Public Policy here at Boston College. I'm also a professor on the faculty. And in those capacities, it is my pleasure to welcome you all here. I've never had a problem not speaking. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, okay. I'm not going to repeat the welcome. My name is Dan Canstrom. I'm the Faculty Director of the Rappaport Center, and on behalf of myself and our Executive Director, Lissy Medvedow, and our Assistant, Abby Chingo, and with great thanks to the various student groups who have co-sponsored this organization, this presentation, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here today. Okay, what I wanted to say is that this panel discussion is, to my mind, important not only because of the compelling issues that the panelists are going to address, but because the way in which they're going to talk about it and the way in which it's been framed is really integral to a lot of what the Rappaport Center has been about. Many times issues of public policy, particularly the most difficult ones, are approached from a very top-down, policy analytic kind of perspective. And many times that not only ignores the voices of communities, particularly communities of color, who are often most affected by these sort of decisions in the most profound and often destructive ways, but it often overrides what is in the best interest of those communities. It ignores them. And that has a devastating effects not only on those communities, but on the creative and possible development of better solutions to what often seem to be intractable problems. So one of our speakers on this panel is our first senior fellow. I hope many of you had the chance to be here for her lecture on Tuesday, and Elizabeth Yeampierre, and she talked a lot, and to my mind, in very compelling and moving and important ways for students to hear about the role of lawyers engaging with activists. And not approaching this with the idea of like, we have the right answer, we have the legal solution, we parachute into these situations and we will figure it out and then we'll tell you what the best solution is. But the exact opposite of that. Listen, be respectful. Think about these people have been dealing with these issues for a long time. They've thought long and hard about them, they've organized, and you are part of that if you want to be, but you're not the leader of it. And you do have certain technical skills which can be useful, but you should never think that those technical skills are a proxy for wisdom or knowing what the best answer is. So that I thought was a very important lesson for our students to hear, and I just wanted to foreground it as we get into the substance of things today. I said I was going to speak briefly. This is not characteristic for me, but I'm now going to speak very briefly and stop. I'm only going to introduce our moderator, who is then going to introduce to you the rest of the panel. The only other thing I want to say is that this is just the first panel event of this semester, and the Rappaport Center has many other events scheduled. You should please check out our website, talk to me, talk to Lissy, talk to Abby, drop in, talk to any of us, and feel free to become a part of this ongoing programming, which has been curated and chosen with great care, and we think thematically works over the course of a semester in important ways. So, and also stay tuned, because we may have other senior fellows, other distinguishing professors, so it's a work in progress. And if any of you are interested in summer internship opportunities, particularly in state and local government through the Rappaport Center, again, talk to me or talk to Lissy Medvedow, and we're happy to talk to you about that. I say that particularly to the students in the room. Okay, I did say this was being recorded, just to reiterate, because there was a commotion going on at the time. So let me introduce Penn Lowe, who is a distinguished senior lecturer and the director of community practice at Tufts University's Department of Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning. Penn is also a faculty member of the Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. He partners with various community-based building organizations in what is called the Solidarity Economy Initiative, Right to the City Alliance, and the Center for Economic Democracy. From 1996 to 2009, he served in various roles, including Executive Director at Alternatives for Community Environment, ACE, which is a Roxbury-based environmental justice group, which I will say actually was started here at Boston College many, many years ago. He holds an MS in Environmental Science and Policy from the Energy and Resources Group at UC Berkeley, and a BS in Electrical Engineering from MIT. He was a research associate at the Pacific Institute for Studies in Development, Environment, and Security in Oakland, California, and a research analyst at the TELUS Institute for Resource and Environmental Strategies in Boston. He's published widely on environmental and social justice issues, has served on the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council's Health and Research Subcommittee, the Mass Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, the Mass Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, the Energy Facilities Siting Board, and the boards of the Environmental Support Center, the Environmental Leadership Program, New World Foundation, and Community Labor United. And as if that were not enough, he's a trustee of the Hyams Foundation and a board member of the Center for Economic Democracy. We could not have a better moderator, and I'm very grateful to Penn for agreeing to do this. And I will now, after you applaud, turn it over to him and his capable hands to introduce the rest of our stellar panel.
All right, thank you, Dan. And also thank you to Lissy and Abby for helping to pull us all together. This is a really special opportunity to be here today with just amazing colleagues and comrades in this work around environmental justice. I'll do a little bit of, thanks Dan for reading my profile from my university page. Lots of boring stuff there. I'll just say a little bit more about my own trajectory and what leads me to this being here today, which hopefully will give you a little bit of sense of how environmental justice, the movement, the work, the communities have been involved for well on 30 plus years now. But I was introduced to the concept of environmental racism in the late 80s. And probably similar in age, maybe a little younger than some of you here. Someone waved in my face the United Church of Christ Toxic Waste and Race Report. And look, this proves that there's disproportionate burdening of communities of color across the country. We're like, oh, environmental racism, what is that? And when I got to graduate school and met people who had just come back from the 1991 People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C., which created the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice. If you haven't had a chance to read those, Google that, and it still reads fresh to me today, the vision that was set by those 17 Principles of Environmental Justice. And when I had an opportunity to come back here to the Boston area and wanted to know who was doing work on environmental justice, I ran right into the organization ACE, Alternatives for Community and Environment. And ACE is based in Roxbury, based in Nubian Square now, has been for a long time. But as Dan mentioned, ACE, the co-founders of ACE were two recent law school grads, Bill Shutkin and Charlie Lord. They were looking for space because they had a little bit of support through a fellowship to start an environmental justice legal support center. And they needed an initial space. They cold called Professor Zig Plotter, who I understand has recently retired. And Zig said, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you come here to BC? And they did. They had an office in the basement. They ran a legal clinic. A lot of students got involved. They taught a class. And so just wanted to really honor that the work of ACE wouldn't have happened the same way without BC providing some space and some real support in those early years. But the environmental justice movement, I'll just say a little bit more. I mean, the thing that really impressed me, and I'll just say I had not considered myself an environmentalist. I saw environmentalism as kind of disconnected from the issues that I cared about and that affected my community. And saw it as kind of like a predominantly white, more privileged kind of space. And it wasn't until environmental justice, and people were saying, you know what, environment is where we live, work, and play. Right? Redefine environment as something that included people in our communities. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. When we learned about environmental racism, we're like, why did these things happen? Dan's already mentioned it. Well, part of the answer is that communities most affected have not had control over decisions that end up primarily harming them. And So we speak for ourselves became another mantra of the environmental justice movement. These are the communities that are most affected, are the ones that have to lead the way to the solutions. And that was something I felt like I could get behind. And that's what ACE was all about, providing support, standing with and behind communities and having their voices speak. Sometimes that's not possible when things go into a strictly legal format and lawyers are required, so there is a role to play. And we'll share a lot more about what that might look like, what it has looked like, and what it could look like. I'll say a little bit about the issues. In the early years, we were fighting off all the environmental bad stuff, right? You didn't have enough hands to count all the different things that were affecting a community simultaneously. And this looked very different, whether you're in an urban neighborhood, whether you're in New York City, in Brooklyn, even differences between Brooklyn and the Bronx. Here in Boston too, difference between whether you're in Roxbury or Chelsea. And, but even bigger differences if you're talking about folks on indigenous lands, if you're talking about farm workers working out in agricultural country. And, but all of these folks came together and said, you know what, the same thing is that we are the ones where all the environmental problems flow downhill to us. And here in the Boston area, what that looked like was fighting off an asphalt plant. We had to do that both in Roxbury and Chelsea. Working with actually a BC law school intern, worked with our youth program because we ran right into the issue of asthma as an environmental health epidemic that the medical establishment was just realizing in that kind of mid-late 90s period. And the young people were asking why. And they saw that they needed to do some of their own community mapping. And with the help of some law students, and they found that there were 15 bus and truck depots, major bus and truck depots. 2/3 of the entire bus fleet serving the region were garaged within a mile of our office in Nubian Square. They were the young people were the ones who kicked off our Clean Buses for Boston Coalition, where we fought for cleaner buses, and we won cleaner buses after about 2 or 3 years, by early 2000s. All the buses were converted to cleaner alternatives. And so really fighting off all this bad stuff forced our communities to be involved and lead the way towards the systemic solutions, the things that would make sure that there's nothing that's going to flow downhill to the next least powerful community. And so for us, it moved from fighting against the environmental bad things to trying to figure out how do we actually build the kinds of communities that can support the thriving, the health, right, the livable conditions that our communities, that everyone deserves. And so for us, going from that more defensive, reactive stance, right, what this looked like was trying to not just clean up the bus fleet, but fight for first-class affordable transit service. To this day, ACE still has a T-Riders union that it organizes. It went from just trying to clean up the vacant lots and brownfields, right, to building the housing, the urban farms, the businesses that our communities need. So the work that I've been involved in the last, since 2009, since I left ACE, has really been about helping to define what that just transition can look like. Dan mentioned, some of us are calling it solidarity economies, but it's all about how can communities have collective control, democratic control over the resources, the economies, the systems, right, that determine what kind of environments we have to live in. So we have 3 amazing folks on this panel. I'm not going to read everything in their bios, which you can read online. But I will say, I'll start with Dwaign. Dwaign Tyndal is the executive director at ACE. He's a couple of his executive directors post the time I left. And I first met Dwaign when he was working with another community group, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, back around 2000. But he's been executive director at ACE for the last 7 years. He's got 25 plus years of working on community development, workforce, economic development, housing. So welcome, Dwaign. To my direct left, María, Belén Power. We've got to call you Undersecretary now.
Undersecretary.
But before you were Undersecretary, I got to know you when you were doing immigrants' rights organizing in Chelsea with the Chelsea Collaborative, La Colaborativa. And you, just prior to joining the administration, was Associate Executive Director at Green Roots, which was a sister organization to ACE in the city of Chelsea. And also, you happen to be a student of mine in our mid-career Master of Public Policy program at Tufts. So great to see you. And finally, Elizabeth Yeampierre, who has too many accolades and titles to count or even to keep track of, but all entirely deserved. Elizabeth is literally a rock star in this work. I got to know Elizabeth, who has been the longtime executive director at UPROSE in Brooklyn, New York, when we were all part of working on a Northeast Environmental Justice Network. So got to know, bring people from Boston, connecting to people in New York, to people in Hartford, Connecticut, to Philadelphia, to New Jersey, and what have you. So Elizabeth, it's really wonderful to have you here in our area. And I just want to say I still remember very clearly when I had a chance to visit you all. This was back in 2005, but you were talking about the youth program because youth are so central to the work. And when we say youth, we're mostly talking about teens.
Yeah.
And what was so impressive to me was that the teens weren't just doing their own program. I think I was there and the teens had either were just planning or had just done an event where they said, we need to bring this to our little sisters and brothers and our younger siblings and say, this is not just something that we as teens need to be doing, but we're going to do something to bring along even younger, the children under 10. And I just found that so amazing. Talk about what sustainability can actually mean, right? This is the kind of work we've got to do. So welcome to all of you. And I am going to give you each, you all each have about 5 minutes or so to really introduce your own work around what it means to be doing frontline work towards just transition. And then after that, we will see where we take it. But I know we've all talked with each other about a few themes and questions we can go into, but I didn't know who's going to go first, but maybe we can start this way and go, okay. So
sure.
Go for it.
Thanks, Penn. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks, Penn, and thanks for having me. Like Penn said, my name is María and I am the Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs under Secretary Tupper and the Healy Driscoll administration. I was born and raised in Nicaragua, Central America, in the aftermath of the revolution, and grew up really seeing firsthand the very deep social and economic inequities. I moved to the U.S. and came to college in Minnesota, and immediately got involved in the immigrants' rights movement, which I continued through in my work with day laborers in New York, in Westchester County, and then in Chelsea, where I met Penn, working at La Colaborativa with immigrant communities around workers' rights, immigrant rights, public housing, and I got involved in the environmental justice movement. I think very similar to Penn, I felt like, I don't really want to do that. That's for wealthy people who have the resources and the time to focus on the environment. I really just want to work with immigrants and human rights. And immediately after I was convinced to apply to a different department of the same organization, I realized that it's the same communities, the same immigrants that were being evicted or having to suffer wage theft or suffering from deportations, the very same folks who have the highest asthma rates or suffering from cardiovascular disease and being impacted by the environmental burdens in Chelsea and East Boston. And so about a year and a half ago, after the Collaborativa, my colleague and I founded Green Roots in 2016, and I have been there as Associate Executive Director leading the environmental justice work through different departments, which now after leaving, it's really great to see some of the victories. The low-income fair at the MBTA was announced yesterday. I was just talking to Carlos around Community Land Trust that took many, many years to kick off. at Green Roots, a microgrid that my former colleague Devin here, just working on several issues that it's really great now to see from a bit of a distance, really thriving. And about a year and a half ago, I was appointed to be Undersecretary, which I was pretty shocked and really questioned. Are you sure? We were the ones just getting arrested against the substation in East Boston. So, but I took the job, and it was really a gamble. But it's been an amazing year and a half, and really, really exciting to see what the administration is trying to do and working really hard to bring folks to the table. When we talk about environmental justice, we think about, or at least me and my work, around two main principles, and that being meaningful engagement and equitable distribution. It's sort of narrowed or boiled down to that as a sort of way of reminding ourselves what is it really that we're trying to do, and it is meaningful engagement and equitable distribution, both of benefits and burdens. And so I'll just talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. In this past budget, the governor and lieutenant governor committed what we think is a pretty big deal, 1% of the budget, which sounds small, but it is it's an increase, a 24% increase in the budget that we used to have in energy and environmental affairs. And so it is a pretty big commitment, $2 million just to language access, to support all of the agencies in our secretariat to provide language interpretation and translation. And also part of the budget is one environmental justice liaison under all secretariats. Under all agencies in our secretariat, which are 13, environmental protection, conservation and resources, public utilities, so all of the agencies now have a specific person that focuses on environmental justice. And so, just finally to talk about what it means for us to do meaningful engagement and equitable distribution, we focus on the bodies of engagement that we work with, both internal and external. Internal meaning Environmental Justice Task Force at EEA, the Environmental Justice Interagency Working Group, which includes all secretariats, and then externally with community organizations like Green Roots and ACE, and the Environmental Justice Table, which was created. It's completely separate and external to government, but engaging them and making sure that folks have a seat at the table. So when we think about meaningful engagement, I talked about language access, ensuring that tribal and indigenous communities, that there's a focus and that they are at the table, low-income communities, communities of color, and but also ensuring that the outcome of that engagement reflects the process and not just having more night meetings for night meetings' sake. Nobody really wants to go to any more night meetings. And then equitable distribution, really focusing on workforce development, the distribution of benefits versus burdens, and cumulative impact assessments, as well as community benefit agreements and Justice 40 as sort of distribution of federal dollars, and ensuring that that is going to the communities that need it the most under-resourced and vulnerable communities. So I'll wrap it up there and maybe pass it back to you, Penn.
What's up? Dwaign, Tyndal, Executive Director at ACE. It's good to be here. How many people here for the burritos? We need lawyers. We need them smart, we need them aggressive, we need them in the movement. Our movement will not survive in the next 10, 15 years without great lawyers. Lawyers cannot be on the outside looking in. They have to be integrated into the process. Whether we call them community lawyering, or we call them EJ lawyers, or energy lawyers, or whatever you want to call it, lawyers will be the linchpin and our leverage point in many of our battles. One of the things that always attracted me to ACE was that they had lawyers. And sometimes they had some very irritating lawyers. No, for real. But they were more irritating to our opposition than they were to the community. And that's all I needed. That's all I wanted. When they came in, I can't remember his album says. But when he came in, he was all about, and it changed dynamics and it gave us leverage points to have a different kind of conversation. Even before litigation, having a lawyer on your hip helps immensely. So ACE is one of the few EJ boards that have a staff attorney based on that history. And Sophia Owens is not as irritating, but she's very effective in her work. And it makes a big difference. So anytime I'm around first year, second year law school students, I emphasize that there's a home for you in the movement. Whether you go in the private sector, we have EJAN, which is the Environmental Justice Assistance Network, which is a pro bono collaborative that across the state that if frontline communities are having environmental justice issues, we could pull in lawyers across the state to address those issues. I think that's one of the powerful legacies of ACE. The type of lawyering that will happen in the next 10 years will be radically different, in my opinion. I think it's going to be not just the law, it's going to be the integration of policy, it could be integration of politics, it's going to be a lot of different things that lawyers will have to manage to kind of be effective in movement and community space. That's okay. But, so this is where we are. Secretary of Treasury Yellen said that over the next 25 years, they will invest $75 trillion on climate. That's a lot of money to invest in climate. What does that mean with energy? What does that mean to frontline communities? It means that this struggle of quality of life, public health will be front and center in the next generation. Are we prepared? No, not really. We're not supposed to be prepared. I mean, they will come for our communities first, but they will come to communities at will, as often as they can. And one of the lines of defense is how we implement existing regulations and laws. So EJ is connected to the civil rights movement. And I always remind my lawyers friends, whether it's CLF or Greater Boston Legal Services or Lawyers for Civil Rights, that the civil rights movement did not exist without lawyers. And there's always been a tension between lawyers and the folks on the ground to deal with it. They dealt with it in the 50s and 60s and 40s. We're going to have to deal with it in the 2030s and the 2040s. That's the nature of the beast. But going forward, we need that layer of community-based organizing, policy, and law, and how that is integrated will make the difference. Pick the issue, any issue. It will be coming down to, like, can we educate folks on the ground? Can we master the policy piece? And can we manage the legal frameworks? And as the Supreme Court probably end up 8-1 eventually, we're going to have to really double down and have real strategies on multiple layers to get through this process. This is nothing easy. It's not for the faint of heart. If you have like that punk in you, it's not the place to be, because this is literally frontline work. And we will get hit first, but the society will get hit later. So this is what ACE represent, whether it's in building emissions, public health, transportation, housing, all of that is crushing around us right now. The displacement, the gentrification, the reason why most of y'all can't afford to live in Boston, right? And the reason why many of our families are being pushed out of Boston is a byproduct of this political economy that take no prisoners. So this is what we are. There's no sugarcoating. Anyone that works within our organizations understand the grind and how hard the work is. But what you are doing now is a necessity how the society will be shaped. So that's it. Thank you.
It is such an honor to be on this panel. I just need to say something about this panel. Take a good look at them for a second, because this is what climate justice, environmental justice movement looks like. We are matriarchal, we are leaderful, we are intergenerational, although not so much generational. And we work at the intersection of racial justice and climate change, and we come from struggle. I was listening to Dwaign, and I was thinking about how this moment requires that we be as creative and fearless as our ancestors were when they were putting together the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's what's required right now. We don't work 9 to 5 because injustice isn't 9 to 5. We do what is required and what the moment is demanding. So we work 24/7. It's Saturday and we are doing our thing, and we get a call that some legislation that we are pushing that is going to benefit our people is under attack. We are on. We are warriors. That's what we do. And so it is the kind of spirit that this moment is requiring. María Belén was talking about her background, and I thought maybe it was important to talk a little bit about who we are and how we come to this work. I am a Puerto Rican of African and indigenous ancestry. My people come from Haiti into Vieques. And I grew up in the 70s in a place where I had to walk through brownfields, where the homes that I lived in were laced with lead, where I went to 5 schools in 8 years because we were displaced, in the shadow of power plants and waste transfer stations. I grew up in an environmental justice community, and all of the health impacts that happen to our communities live in my body and the bodies of my people and my family. And so this fight for justice in the environmental and climate arena is very personal to all of us. This is not something we studied and decided that we were going to become contemporary saviors or missionaries and go and help another community. So we expect deep, deep allyship and solidarity, because what we are enduring and what our communities are going to face as a result of climate change will exacerbate all of the isms. What we are facing really requires people that are connected to understanding that if we're going to survive as a nation, we're going to have to strengthen social cohesion, and that only happens with our relationship with each other and how we're in community. UPROSE is Brooklyn's oldest Latino community-based organization, and if you were here a few days ago, I'll probably repeat a little bit of that. We are intergenerational and matriarchal, and our organization is working on building leadership. We've sent, Penn was mentioning meeting some of our young people. One of those young people who started with us when he's 10, María, is now the executive director of the New York City Immigration Coalition. We have organized 8 climate justice youth summits. We have sent 4 young people to Antarctica and 3 to the North Pole on scientific expeditions. And we don't create, it's not that we're taking the kid who's doing really well, it's like the kid from around the block. And all of them have gotten to first-year colleges. At Tufts, one of the young people who's starting, Barry, he's our most recent. So the organization is really intergenerational. We believe that power is shared across the table. We don't believe in this tension that exists in this country of one generation pitted against the other, where one generation wants power and the other one wants to hold on. Really, the power is in how we are in community with each other. And so that's really integral to how we build and how we organize. We work on policy, and we passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, created a statewide coalition, created a lot of coalitions. We have a lot of frameworks, and I invite you to read them, to go to the Climate Justice Alliance and understand where our values are and how we work and what a just transition is, how we move from the extractive economy to the renewable economy, and what we expect from lawyers in this place. We work on infrastructure, and we get funding to try to make sure that instead of benefits, we're getting infrastructure, which means that we need to negotiate deals, and we need lawyers who understand what the transactional tools to ensure that we are getting the right agreements that will benefit our community communities in the long term, and so that our communities are taken away from toxic harm, and so that the climate solutions don't become the environmental justice problems. And that can easily happen in our communities. What is benefiting a privileged community can really harm another community, and we still call it green, right? And then we organize. Oh my God, we organize non-stop. And we center culture and joy in the middle of all our organizing. We organize differently than other people. If you look us up, it's beautiful. You're like, those people are building power? Yes, we are. We do it through hip-hop, through music, through salsa, through bomba. Literally, whatever is necessary for a community that is dealing with all of the challenges, from extreme policing, displacement, ice raids, all of the things that our people are dealing with and now also have to deal with extreme weather events. We need to be able to make sure that the joy is our resistance, and that in that, that's how we build power and we build community. And so the role for lawyers, we talked about this a few days ago if you were here, everything. Literally, climate change is going to impact everything, everybody in every way, and it's going to take our people out first, and you saw that. You saw it in Houston, you saw it in Katrina, in New Orleans, you see it in Puerto Rico. You see it where the communities have a history of extraction. It is going to be worse. And so we need you to be able to be creative, to be fearless, and to be committed to deep solidarity, to understanding that maybe leadership might not look like you, and that should be okay with you. Because we've been following leadership that looks like you for a minute, right? And it's our communities that are literally in harm's way. And so if you're committed to justice, and if you recognize the fact that climate change is not open to discussion, and you want to do something that is purposeful and meaningful, you want to be about that life, then you support the work that is being held by our organizations. You don't build new ones, you do some landscaping to find out who's doing the work, and how can I add value, how can I serve, and we will tell you, this is what we need. And you're going to get a lot of love, a lot of support, and a lot of shine. Because the work is complex. Climate change is complex in terms of how it's showing up. And so our organizations are doing multidimensional work, and that's literally changing the landscape. And so you are being invited to be warriors, the legal warriors that will honor the ancestors that made it possible for so many of us to be in this room today. Like, we're not here without affirmative action. We're not here without the civil rights movement, right? And think about the legacy of what young people, particularly, and I want to speak to those of you who are young people of color in the audience. I was trained by Young Lords and Black Panthers when I was in my early 20s. What's the legacy? The Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the Brown Berets, the American Indian movement, Standing Rock, Black Lives Matter, all of it. A long history of putting their lives on the line so that we can all be in this classroom talking to each other today. And we, across race, culture, ethnicity, and class, learn from each other and have to be committed to self-transformation. So I want to thank you for listening with your heart, if you have spirit, and looking forward to participating in this panel. Gracias.
All right, we've got about half an hour where we can do a little bit of discussion with each other, and then we're going to open it up for questions for everybody else. I feel like you've each given us some real nuggets, just opening up the conversation, and some of the themes that we've come to include just how holistic and intersectional all of this work is, right? And how deep it goes. These are, I would just say environmental justice, climate, these are not issues. These are not like just topics, right? These are about how we live, how human beings, right, are able to exist on this planet or not. And I guess I'd love to hear from each of you maybe just a little bit more, maybe if you can each share a case or just an example of like how this kind of work is going on in your communities, and just to give us a little bit better sense of, what are the actual things that your communities are working on.
I'll be brief because I'm the oldest one, and when you're older, you go on. So I'm just going to try to be brief. In our community, we're trying to decarbonize Sunset Park, and we have this comprehensive plan where we've mapped all of the rooftops for community-owned solar. and we're ready to launch one of those initiatives, but we've really needed lawyers to help us in a lot of different ways. In negotiating the contracts with the owners of the property. Remember, we have, when you are in a dense urban community, you don't have site control. It's really different. And so negotiating what those leases are and the agreements, looking at different kinds of governance models, really the kinds of tools that you may not think of sexy, but really make it possible for us to really move and use our space in a way that is addressing climate change and the needs of the local community. Working with public-private corporations like the New York City Economic Development Corporation, when they meet with us, they bring their lawyers. And so we need to bring our lawyers too. And we need our lawyers to really sort of take apart a lot of the language and look through literally the fine print and tell us what that means and what we're signing away. And we've made mistakes along the way. And we made mistakes because we moved at the speed of trust without actually knowing what the document meant. We have to negotiate MOUs, and sometimes the MOUs don't have teeth. And so we need other kinds of alternative documents. That's kind of where you come in. So I want to stop there because what we're talking about right now is infrastructure, and we're talking about procurement policies and other kinds of things that really require your close attention to make it possible for us to have the power to then do the organizing and build sort of the ecosystem that is going to take us away from harm's way and prepare us for the impacts of climate change.
So the other side use their lawyers to intimidate our community. Whether you're dealing with city folks, labor, on the private sector, they kind of flash some legal terms, suggest that this may be illegal. And the best thing, and one of the most effective things that I could say is, your lawyers talk to my lawyers. Silence. They do not expect frontline communities to have legal representation. They do not. So when we was doing the BERDO, Building Emission Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, which is to reduce building emissions on buildings over 20,000 square feet, Boston's bought. So you pass the ordinance, it's no regulatory infrastructure inside. And then, they take the photo ops and everybody smiling with the mayor, and then in the back room, they create the regulatory infrastructure. Well, we had the capacity, both policy and legal, to engage that very aggressively. And the product was radically different because we had a lawyer on staff, that we had our policy folks on staff to kind of make it in a way that reduce offsets, to reduce ways that businesses could kind of get around the issues of building emissions. And that doesn't really happen without lawyers. So when I was talking to a political appointee and they said, well, we have concerns, I said, put it on paper and send it to my lawyer. Silence. We still haven't put it on paper. I'm being real. So that is kind of like the value in intersections, and this ordinance that we passed in the city of Boston. Now we're working with Senator Markey because they want to use the BERDO as a framework for federal legislation on building emissions. The work we do actually matters. And the work, community lawyering or the legal insights, when it's built into the process, it makes a whole different type of done law. So thank you.
I'll talk a little bit from the government side. I'll talk a little bit from the government side. And one thing I've learned in the past year and a half is that we do three things. We regulate, we convene, and we distribute dollars. So those three things are sort of if you look at everything that we do, they fit into those three buckets. And so when it comes to regulate, we're really looking at cumulative impact analysis and how to incorporate that into the different agencies. So DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, released their first CIA. Being for me that I was saying CIA in terms of cumulative impact is really odd. And And the first cumulative impact analysis regulations for certain air permits. So this is the first in the state. No other agency does it. And so now we're trying to develop cumulative impact analysis for the siting of energy infrastructure. So, it's totally new. We've never done it before. What does cumulative impact analysis have anything to do with us, needing to develop energy infrastructure for the transition? So that's one area in which the regulations, this is what we're doing in terms of cumulative impact, but then also moving forward and looking at other agencies and departments and how do we incorporate CIAs into their work. Convene, I think transparency is a big part of it. There's a lot that happens in government that nobody knows, especially, I remember being recorded, especially communities of color and low-income communities that are just simply not at the table. And so when I look at who has access and who do people sort of gut check with, it's pretty obvious that the most vulnerable residents are not the first folks that we're gut checking with. Like, who do I call to say, hey, how does this sound? So bringing folks to the table and ensuring that we are, that they are in that sort of, inner circle and the know, but then also developing trust with them. And it's not just about what we need, but how can we support their priorities. And then distributing dollars. There's, you all know, but an unprecedented amount of dollars. I was a little bit skeptical of the Green New Deal and really questioning whether it came out of the grassroots movement as it was being portrayed. But this is a really incredible, I don't think we're ever going to see this again in our lifetime. The amount of money, and Dwaign touched on it a little bit, the amount of money that is coming down. And it is coming down fast. And a lot of it has already been, decided where it's going. But it is, it's going to be a defining moment on where those dollars go and the impact that they have in either exacerbating the impacts on low-income communities and communities of color, or actually making a difference. I think, we can reduce emissions overall, average of the state, and still increase pollution in the Chelseas and Roxburys of the state. And so just looking at, our large picture, big picture goals is just not enough. What does it look like on the ground in these communities?
Each of your examples is just making me think so much about how it's making me think very optimistically right now. Because I think about how environmental justice, communities dealt with it and were experiencing all these things, but didn't necessarily have the same kind of visioning. And this ecosystem that you mentioned, I feel like that's been filling out over the last 3-4 decades. And would agree with you, Dwaign, we are not ready for everything that's coming down the pipe. The world is not staying the same, it can't. How we come through this will depend a lot on how we can change up the systems and processes and structures that got us into this mess in the first place, right? And that involves a lot of policy, a lot of legal. And so at the same time that I'm hearing that it is vital for lawyers, legal strategies and tools to be part of what is employed in the transformation work. I guess I'm curious, what are some of the challenges, and what are some of the things that you feel like we have to watch out for so that we don't replicate, right, some of those systems and processes that got us into this mess and help us to build something different, right, that can go beyond kind of this deep-seated historical, oppression. We know racism isn't just something that happened because a few people didn't like the way other people looked, right? This is rooted deep in colonialism, in slavery, so how do we do this work in a way where we're actually getting beyond and transforming the system itself while we're trying to keep our communities out of harm's way?
I'll take a shot.
Yeah.
So we have to be comfortable with numbers. The Inflation Reduction Act provided $4.6 trillion. And most of those dollars was kind of directed to kind of resetting the energy systems that we have. Within that $4.6 trillion, maybe $2.5 billion was directed to community and community-based organizations. So clearly, the vast majority of those resources will go to the private sector. What type of command and control will energy companies, hedge funds, will have over trillions of dollars? That's clear. It's going. It's already there. Big hydrogen hubs, carbon capturing, putting nuclear power plants online, AI, which takes tons of energy. and that's a victory. The reset of the energy grid may not reset the reality of the impacts on frontline communities. We have to sit with that. And when the Secretary of Treasury, which is not a climate activist, said that $75 trillion over the next 25 years will need to be invested where? We have to, will Goldman Sachs become green? Will JP Morgan become green? Nah. They about to stack that cake and make it is bad and horrible right now. I'm just saying from what I'm seeing right now relative to the numbers. And we as EJ are being pulled into it. And when we hear like $100 million or $1 billion, our heart flutters. But when you hear 75, Google it, yelling, $3 trillion a year over the next 25 years. Financial Times, I don't think it's some leftist propaganda. That's what we are going to deal with, and not next year, right now. Once they start making those type of pronouncements, it's already done. Goldman Sachs, JP, all the hedge funds, they decide like how we're going to cut that up. Just explain to them how we're going to cut these resources up. And our concern is not just for the environment, but about the human beings that are being impacted by this new investment. And greener does not mean better for our communities. Sometimes it may be just the opposite. So we look in all gift horses in the mouth, and that's what I'm seeing on the front lines. Thank you.
So as you're hearing Dwaign talk about the IRA funds, and you're excited about all the money on the table, you're not hearing this story. And the truth is that of this small amount that comes out of the legacy of the environmental justice movement that is available, obstacles have been created to make it impossible for us to access those funds. And universities and colleges all over the country have lined up and created environmental justice programs, set up a group of academic advisors to determine and judge who in our community gets the funding. My husband likes to say that we are the tree shakers and people in power are the jelly makers. So we create opportunity that other people then take advantage of, and very little of that comes to us. But the media will tell you, and the story will be that all of a sudden, we're getting all this money, right? But they don't tell you how difficult it's going to be to access it for massive infrastructure projects that are necessary in our community to build climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. So they don't tell that whole story. And I think it's really important, because what's the role for you in that, right? And so in addition to the fact that we can't access the funds, it's really also important, as Dwaign was talking about how so much of that money is going to perpetuate harm. So much of it is going to perpetuate harm. But the story that you hear is that, oh my God, frontline communities are benefiting. That's the carrot, that's the hook for the media. And that's not the whole story. So we are in the position of not only having to build leadership, organize, and do all the things, but also understand the math and understand how systems have been created within these agencies to block us from having access to the resources that we need to manifest the vision that has been created by our communities. And I got to tell you, even with little or no funding, our communities are transforming the landscape. They are doing all the things. If you study, if you look at what's happening in New York State, by Push Buffalo in upstate New York, if you see what's happening in the Bronx, in the South Bronx, in Brooklyn, if you see what's happening in California, what Penn is doing out there, in the Southwest, what people are doing in Indian country, we are literally transforming the landscape. Imagine if we had the resources to be able to do what is necessary so that we are living within our, so we can continue to live within our carbon footprint and prepare ourselves for changes that are already here. So please pay attention to what Dwaign is saying, pay attention to the numbers, because that's where we lose power.
Okay, Belén, I think one of the questions you had wanted to address is how can government play a role in supporting communities to be doing this work, right? Because I think we're being warned now about, there are a lot of ways that it's being done now that we need to pay attention to, call out, because some of it is really not set up to work for our communities. So I know, we're not asking you necessarily to speak as a long-time government person, but you're in it, and you've been on the community side. So I would be curious, what are your thoughts? Where can you push the boundaries? Where can you start to see some real different ways, or do you have hopes for where you can do some of this work differently?
Yeah, I think one of the things that keeps coming to mind, which is not the most positive answer, is that it is really, if we're looking at structural change, it is really hard to comply with the system while transforming it. And so, many times I am told, well, that's not legally, possible. Or we're not mandated to do that. Well, okay, you're not mandated, but can you? Because there's a lot of flexibility that we have, but who are we using that flexibility for? Are we using the flexibility to advance justice or to advance private companies and project proponents? So I think, one piece I think is staying in connection and in community with the folks on the ground. Before taking the job, I called a friend who used to work in government, and she said, just make sure you keep your relationships and your people, because it becomes really hard to look out the window. So you just get so immersed and isolated with and believing what you are hearing. And so gut checking and having those relationships with the communities who say, you're crazy, it's not okay, that solution or that proposal is not what the communities need. And so, one of the sort of pieces that I keep bringing up to our general counsel or our legal team is I just need a little bit more creativity. I just can't keep being told, no, you can't do this, or no, you can't do that. Because there are ways. And in fact, maybe we shouldn't comply and, go to court. But there is a lot of fear of getting sued, of not complying. And I have very honest conversations with our team that we're not going to change the system if we just keep complying with the laws and the or not the regulations, but with the sort of rules of the game. And so I'm hopeful that there are some pretty amazing people that are creative and thinking, okay, so let's think about the goal. where are we trying to go, and how do we get to yes? How do we get there? Maybe it's not this way, but it's around. And just being persistent and keep, it's like water, eventually, water will drip through the rocks. So I hope that was not so negative.
No, thank you. I do find that to be positive, to have folks who are like you, who have those connections and lived experiences, so you can do at least a bit of checking and accountability. But Elizabeth, you do remind me that even us sitting here in a university, right, and that's kind of who pays my bills now. There are really no neutral spaces here, right? Our institutions, even though we have these noble missions for higher learning, and producing good for all, there are a lot of ways that these institutions that we're part of, especially these universities, are part of perpetuating, either whether it's ways of thinking, and I think you're naming something where it's like, and this is something I harp on a lot, is that we really are in charge of producing a hierarchy of knowledge in universities, where we put ourselves right in our forms of knowledge at the top, and oftentimes that's used by those in power to then say, hey, okay, let's get the universities. They're kind of this neutral space. They should control where some of this money should go. And again, I think we're looking out there and saying, yes, all of us are somehow entangled and complicit in these systems. But the question is, how are we becoming aware? Where are we doing what we can to try to build something different and to push back? And it matters a lot who is a part of these institutions, right? That's why it matters a lot when you're sitting in that office right now, right? You can have different conversations. And same with those of you who might not be the folks who've been always the kinds of people that come into institutions like this one. So I'm going to ask one final question before we open it up, and this is really just a forward-looking question. Where are you most hopeful when you look at the horizon of possibilities in this work that we're doing around just transition?
Where are we as individuals?
Yeah. What do you find to be most hopeful when that you're
There's a woman who is my hero who was killed in Honduras, named Berta Cáceres. And she said, we are feared because we are fearless. And I think about that every single day. So I think that where I'm most helpful, I feel that I'm fearless. I'll ask the hard questions. I'll push as hard as I can. I'll take the risks of being defunded, and have. I'll take the risks of being marginalized and pushed, and I have. I feel that this Western culture of civility is violent, and I am at that point in my life where I just want to feel like everything that I do is moving the dial to support human rights. And so every time I have the privilege and the blessing from the ancestors to be in these spaces and to be in community with you, I want to be able to help you know how powerful you are. And so this is not a conversation about lawyering. It's not a conversation about writing a proposal about infrastructure. It is my spirit saying that I come from a legacy of extraction, from enslaved people, from colonized people who went through things that I can only imagine. And so my commitment is to give everything to make sure that your children, my grandchildren, if I ever have them, still hoping, will be able to live and thrive and have a good life. That's all I can say.
My hope is, I still believe that this is a winnable battle. I think we will have resources and intelligence and will to win. It's just a multi-generational battle that I may not be able to see that victory. Same way King didn't see the victory, and Same way our ancestors pushed on and not seeing that obvious victory. But I actually believe that our side will win. It's just going to take a little bit longer. It's going to take a lot of sacrifice. But I think this is a winnable battle.
I'll say I'm really hopeful, not to focus too much on cumulative impact analysis, but we are starting to look at things holistically and intersectional and the big picture that I think we have never done before. And so looking at communities as a whole and looking at what we're trying to do and what impact it will have on communities who have already other burdens that have nothing to do with what you're looking at. But cumulatively, it has a broader impact. I think what's interesting now is, we all know, or I hope we all know, that zip code defines your health outcomes. Well now, those communities that used to be undesirable are becoming now desirable. So maybe zip code won't define our health, but it's the people, right? The color of our skin, or the income, or the language that we speak. So this whole framework of zip codes, I think it's being turned upside down. And I'll just finish with, since you spoke about Berta, I have this little sticky on my computer that has a quote from Coretta Scott King. It says something, I'm paraphrasing, that struggle and justice are never really won, that you have to fight for it in every generation. So for me, that's, okay, the long game is there will never be a time when we feel, okay, our job is done, we can sit down and relax. That it will have to be won and fought for in every generation.
All right, thanks for that. Those are the questions that we're asking each other, and we would love to open it up to see if folks in our audience have any questions, comments.
Before we do that, Penn, what's your hope?
Elizabeth kind of stole my thunder, which is that, but I love the way you put it, right? That communities are remaking themselves as we speak, despite the challenges, and we have a lot of examples of, I think, amazing projects and amazing ways of doing things differently, right? Whether it's the community land trusts, where we're owning land together, right, and taking it out of the speculative market. But there's all kinds of examples like that are actually happening. And if government and other folks can pay enough attention and say, you know what, this actually works. Let's put the resources there. People know how to do this, and they just need more. They need more energy behind them. So that's my hope.
Okay. Questions?
Hi, thank you guys all for coming. I was wondering, when your organizations are finding an issue to focus on or determining what issue to focus on, how do you balance the necessary recovery efforts from current impacts of climate change versus future investments? Do you have one area you try to focus on, or do you balance and do both? Or how does that, issue focus work?
I'll take that. Our organization is not deciding what the issues and the priorities are. Our organization staffs community priorities. The community determines what the priorities are, what the issues are. They tell us. We do the research, we do all the work, and we staff them. And then in terms of recovery, we have this model that's called the Just Recovery, the people-to-people Just Recovery. If you go to the Justice Alliance, it tells you what that looks like. So that, for example, I use Puerto Rico as an example. Hurricane Maria hits Puerto Rico, and the first day the Red Cross shows up with thousands of water bottles. We send filtration devices. We move money to the front line so that they can figure out how to get access to energy, food, and drinkable water. But we don't come in with the solutions. We move the money and we ask them, what do you need from us? And that's what we do in the community too. What do you need that we can provide? How can we serve you? So in terms of building for recovery and the word resiliency, resiliency actually means to bounce back. And for us, we can't go back to injustice. We need to move forward. So we think about it in terms of resistance. And so we look at investments that make it possible for us to build and strengthen social cohesion on the ground. And I can give you later on, maybe if you want to come and talk to me, some examples of what we've done to institutionalize that with different sectors in the community, everything from small businesses. What is an auto salvaging shop that has tons of chemicals? How do they become resilient? And how do we make sure we don't push them out, that we keep them being part of the economic fabric and provide them with the resources so that they can thrive in the face of climate change? We do those kinds of things. And so I'm happy to share some of the models and some of the things that we've done, but we always do it in the service of what the community is telling us is necessary.
Other questions?
Elizabeth, I came out here because I know that you just went through port development for wind. And I wonder if there's anything you can share about that.
About offshore wind?
Yes.
I'm just laughing because the texts about offshore wind don't stop, right? We fought a company called Industry City for 7 years. We fought the rezoning. And we fought them because they were trying to take the industrial sector and turn it into a destination location, to put in high-rises, tech. And we wanted to retain the industrial character of the community, but we didn't want the industrial nature to kill us. So we were thinking about a green reindustrialization, where we are doing green manufacturing, where we are building for climate adaptation. And so we've got this plan called the Grid. And I'd invite you to go to the website and look at it. And so as a result of that victory against Industry City, which is featured in a film called Emerging City, all of you should see it. It's part of PBS POV. It was just picked up by Tribeca Film. As a result of that victory, we got like 9 blocks that became that part of the largest assembly of wind turbines. And so at the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, we now have offshore wind for the first time in Brooklyn, and it's kind of shaping and informing what the country is doing. We created some principles for developers in the offshore wind sector with Taproot and with the Climate Justice Alliance, because developers are developers and they don't know what to do in community. And developers, remember who they are. It's BP. It's companies that have a history of harm all of a sudden pivoting to the offshore wind economy. And so we have really been shaping and influencing the conversation about supply chain, about what those jobs are, where's the training, where are the gaps, how do we prepare people in our communities for the green economy, how can they access them, are they willing to hire people that don't speak English, single mothers with children, people coming out of the prison system, people that are undocumented. It is become an ecosystem within itself, and it's really sort of full of potential harm, and could become really sort of just the green economy without justice at its center, without a just transition. So our goal is really to make sure that we are involved in making this a model of what a just transition could look like. And that's a lot of work, but we are working with folks down in the Gulf South, we're working with people here in Massachusetts, with folks up in Oregon, and we've had the opportunity to work with and train about 18 developers, and they're hungry for it because no one ever trained them. People assume that people come into our neighborhood sometimes to do harm, and some do. Some just don't know. Some never got the training. Some were never provided with the skills of how you show up in a different way and build in a different way. And so we're going to start from a place of that kind of thinking and figure out what those resources should look like. And I will tell you in all humility that we are figuring it out, because this is new to all of us. And so we're learning as we go along. But I will tell you that the one thing that is really important in developing those solutions is that you do it as part of a collective. That you don't assume individually that one organization or one person has the answers to these things. Clearly, when you're working with a wide range of people, somehow you come up with the most sophisticated strategies to be able to hold that space. But yeah, I was there at the shovel-ready thing, and the mayor was giving me the side-eye. Because remember, some of the people that were there on stage with me were the people who were fighting us when we had the vision for offshore wind. So it's kind of cool, and you guys should check out the movie.
Other questions?
Hello. So all of you brought up all of the influx of money coming in, especially with the IRA and then like different governmental declarations. I'm wondering what's, in your opinion, the best way to hold like the government accountable for prioritizing communities that, like frontline communities in the use of that money? Because I'm thinking of places like the Seaport District in Boston where all of this like the tax rates, like there's crazy investment in it, and now they're turning to the city asking them to protect them from sea level rise. So like, how do we prioritize the communities that are, in my opinion, and I think most people here, like more deserving of that, the influx of resources?
You will need to develop new systems of oversight going forward. If you just take the Seaport as an example, and it's an epidemic of the obsession of waterfront development, there was warned not to build on the water. Finance sprinkled a fairy dust, and now they have to figure out how you're going to pay the insurance. And then they're going to go back to the city or the state or the federal government. I think it's going to be a different type of oversight process that's going to need a different type of regulation and a different type of legal framework to kind of keep things in order, because the tendency of what they call mitigation and resiliency, because they do want to bounce back to that. Like what you said, they do, and I'm not sure what type of tools we have currently to combat that issue. And I'm just being honest. We are working to prevent further waterfront development because of the climate change, but it's so much that it's done already. And clearly property managers and building owners are trying to leverage like mitigation dollars towards, I don't know how you mitigate it, but how you kind of make this insurance crushing go away. And I'm not seeing that. So I really believe that, I don't know. I think that's a great question. But this is the question your generation will have to deal with, because the Seaport will have to be addressed. And other places like the Seaport, real quick, the Seaport was an illegal neighborhood anyway, relative to fair housing. Like, we had laws on the books already to prevent that type of neighborhood popping up. Now we have to go back and save it. That's a whole other issue, but that's a good question. If the panel have a greater insight, I just think this is the work that we will have to do going in the near future. Not just the Seaport, but Dot City and Suffolk Downs. All of that is so close to the water, and the building, they still want to build in climate compromised areas. Thank you.
Other questions?
Hello. I thought of this question when, in the discussion around the power of being able to bring your lawyers to the table for different conversations. And, I know sort of sometimes the conversations with lots of lawyers can be inherently adversarial, but are there things that you've been able to see that your lawyers do in these conversations that can help identify common interests or can help move the conversation forward in helpful ways? And on the flip side of that, are there things that you've seen the lawyers on the other side do, or things you wish they would do that can help make that result for everybody?
Yeah. I don't really blame the lawyers. It's how power uses lawyers and the threat of lawyering. Our lawyers have always seemed like a common ground and where we could work together. When we actually have conversations with the lawyers, it's much better than talking to a political appointee or a developer. So I believe that a part of our approach to using our lawyers is to kind of negotiate and mediate conflict. But usually these conflicts, like I said before, it's almost like an attack dog. Well, our lawyers said, and we said, let's put it on paper. Let's have a real conversation and put it in light. And when you have lawyers on your side, you can have that conversation. That's where you can start having negotiations and mediations and so forth to kind of have a different kind of conversations. But without the lawyers on your side, just the threat of having a legal opinion saying what you can and can't do impact the total process. Does that make any sense to you?
I'd like to add something about the approach of different kinds of lawyers, because it's so vast and people come to it in very different ways. So you've got big organizations that are created to sue any kind of environmental degradation, whether it's conservation or whatever, and they have an agenda. And they have an agenda and they go look for clients and people in our communities to support that agenda. That's one kind of lawyering. And then you've got the pro bono lawyers. And the pro bono lawyers come from the private sector. They're usually really white and privileged. They don't have any experience in our communities. And they come and they kill it every single time. And they come because we're inviting them in to support us in something that's important. And the level of respect, the high level of professionalism, and the amount of work that they do from the heart, that they get amped up, blows my mind. Because we have these stereotypes, right? We've all been conditioned to them. And they look like us, they're not from our community, and then they come and they freaking slay. Every single time. And so experience has been overwhelmingly positive. And so I often think that the better lawyers are going to be coming from the public interest sector, but often they're the ones who want to speak for us, they want to be us, they want to supplant us, they want to duplicate our work, because they need to shine, whatever they need that is not settling their spirit. Sometimes conflict happens in the least expected places. And so what we do is we use the Hermes principles for democratic organizing, and before we enter into the relationship, we ask them to sit with us for a little while, and then we have a conversation. But it looks different in so many different ways, and I just want to share that. But it is stunning how private sector lawyers come into the work. I'm like, whoa, they just did that thing. So yeah, they were really good experiences.
I think on that note, we're going to say thank you and to say there's a lot of work to be done, and we are so deeply appreciative of the four of you and the work you're doing on all of our behalves. Thank you for highlighting the work of lawyers, the need for lawyers, both private sector, pro bono, public sector, public interest lawyering. You all will kill it when you go out there and fight the good fights. I especially want to say thank you to Elizabeth, who has been here for 3 days with us as our Rappaport Senior Fellow. You have enriched our community enormously. Thank you. Dwaign, Undersecretary, Penn, thank you, thank you. Go out there and fight the good fight, everybody.